"You're not who I thought you were," he said. And the way his voice cracked told me he'd been rehearsing those words all morning. We were standing in our kitchen. The one with the blue tiles I'd picked out myself. The ones he said reminded him of the ocean. Sunlight was pouring through the window, making everything look warm and hopeful, which felt like a cruel joke. I didn't cry, I just nodded and said I know. What I didn't say was that I wasn't who I thought I was either. And that realization, that quiet earthquake inside my chest, changed everything that came after. My name is Jenna Mitchell. And this is the story of how I lost myself trying to be perfect for everyone else, and how breaking completely was the only way I could finally become whole. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. The kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. My mama worked doubles at the diner on Route 9. And my daddy left when I was 7. I don't remember much about him except the smell of Old Spice and the sound of the screen door slamming. Mama never talked about him after that. She just worked harder, smiled wider, and told me every single day, "Baby girl, you're gonna do better than this. You're gonna be somebody." I believed her. God. I believed her so hard it became my religion. I studied until my eyes burned. I got straight A's, joined every club, volunteered at the library, and never once complained. When I got a full scholarship to Duke, Mama cried so hard she couldn't breathe. She held my face in her hands and said, "I told you. You're gonna change our whole story." That night, I lay in bed feeling like I won the lottery and signed a contract I couldn't read. Both at the same time. College was where I learned to be whoever people needed me to be. I became best friends with my roommate by pretending to love the same music she did. I impressed my professors by writing papers that reflected their own opinions back at them. I got invited to the right parties by laughing at jokes that weren't funny and staying quiet when I had something real to say. And I met Daniel. Daniel Chen was everything I thought I wanted. He was pre-med from a good family in Charlotte, polite, ambitious, safe. When he asked me out, I felt like I'd been chosen for something important. Our first date was at an Italian restaurant downtown. And I ordered what he ordered because I didn't want to seem difficult. When he talked about his future, our future, he made it sound like a blueprint for success. Doctor husband, supportive wife, nice house, 2 kids. A golden retriever named something classic like Max or Bailey. I never asked myself if that's what I wanted. I just assumed wanting him was enough. We got married 3 years after graduation. The wedding was perfect, at least that's what everyone said. Mama wore a lavender dress and cried through the whole ceremony. Daniel's parents paid for everything, which meant his mother controlled everything. The flowers, the music, the guest list, even my dress. Which she said was more appropriate than the one I'd originally chosen. I stood in front of the mirror on my wedding day, looking at a stranger in white lace, and told myself this was happiness. The first few years were fine. Daniel worked brutal hours at the hospital, and I got a job at a marketing firm downtown. I learned how to cook the meals his mother had taught me, kept the house spotless, and showed up to every hospital fundraiser with a smile that hurt my face. I was good at it. Being the perfect wife. The woman who never complained, never caused problems, never asked for too much. But late at night, when Daniel was asleep and the house was quiet, I'd lie awake feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of all that perfection. I started having this recurring dream where I was in a glass box, and everyone could see me, but no one could hear me screaming. Then I met Angela. She was a client at my firm, a photographer who just moved to Raleigh from Brooklyn. She wore vintage band t-shirts and ripped jeans to business meetings, and she didn't apologize for anything. The first time we met, she looked at the presentation I'd prepared and said, "This is good, but it's not you, is it?" I stammered something professional and noncommittal, but she just smiled. "It's okay. Most of us spend half our lives performing for people who aren't even watching." That sentence lived in my head for weeks. Angela and I started having coffee after our meetings. She'd talk about her life, about traveling through Southeast Asia for a year, about the time she quit a corporate job to sleep on a friend's couch and chase her passion. She made risky decisions sound like freedom instead of failure. And slowly, carefully, I started telling her the truth. About feeling empty. About not recognizing myself anymore. About wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. "So why don't you change it?" she asked one day, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Because I can't, I said. I have a husband, a job, a life. People depend on me. She stirred her coffee and looked at me with these calm, knowing eyes. Jenna, you can't pour from an empty cup. You know that, right? I did know. But knowing and doing are oceans apart. Things started shifting after that. Small things at first. I stopped pretending to like Daniel's mother's casseroles. I started taking lunch breaks alone instead of eating at my desk. I bought a journal and started writing, really writing, about how I felt. The words that came out were angry and sad and raw, nothing like the polished, pleasant version myself I showed the world. Daniel noticed. You've been different lately, he said one night over dinner. Distracted. I'm just tired, I lied. Maybe you should cut back on work. We've been talking about starting a family anyway. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. We'd been talking about starting a family. Or he'd been talking and I'd been nodding. I couldn't even remember anymore. I'm not ready for that, I said quietly. He frowned. You're 32, Jenna, we can't wait forever. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried so hard I threw up. Not because I didn't want kids, but because I realized I didn't know what I wanted. I'd spent so long being what other people needed that I'd erased myself completely. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd spent the morning in back-to-back meetings, pretending to care about a campaign for a product I'd never use. At lunch, Daniel texted saying he'd be late again, which meant I'd eat alone. Again. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. And I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Her hair was styled the way Daniel's mother suggested. Her lipstick was a shade his mother had picked out. Her clothes were safe, professional, invisible. Even her posture was an apology. I started the car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, I just drove. I ended up at a park I used to visit as a kid. Back when Mama would bring me here on her days off. There was an old oak tree we used to sit under, and I walked to it like my body remembered the way. I sat down in the grass, not caring that I was wearing a pencil skirt, and I just broke. I cried for the girl who worked herself to exhaustion for a scholarship. I cried for the woman who'd molded herself into someone else's idea of perfect. I cried for all the times I'd said yes when I meant no, smiled when I wanted to scream, stayed quiet when I had something important to say. And then, when I'd cried myself empty, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. I drove home, walked into the kitchen, and told Daniel we needed to talk. That's when he said it. You're not who I thought you were. And I realized he was right. But also, he'd never really known me at all, because I'd never shown him. I'd shown him a version of myself designed to fit into his life, his plans, his family's expectations. The real me, the messy, uncertain, still figuring it out me, had been buried so deep I'd almost forgotten she existed. I need time, I told him. I need to figure out who I am. That's selfish, he said. And the word hit like a slap. Maybe it was selfish. But I was 32 years old and I couldn't name a single I wanted that wasn't connected to someone else's happiness. That seemed like a bigger problem than selfishness. I moved out 2 weeks later. Not far, just to a small apartment on the other side of town. Daniel's family was furious. His mother called me ungrateful. His sister said I was throwing away a good man for no reason. Even Mama, sweet exhausted Mama, said, "Baby, marriage is hard. You can't just quit when it gets difficult." But this wasn't about the marriage being hard. It was about me disappearing inside it. The first night in my new apartment, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and felt terrified. I'd left my husband, disappointed everyone who mattered, and I had no idea what came next. But underneath the terror was something else. Something that felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years. I called Angela. She came over with wine and Thai food, and we sat on my empty living room floor talking until 3 a.m. "You did the bravest thing," she said. "Most people never find the courage to choose themselves." "I don't feel brave," I admitted. "I feel like I'm falling." "Maybe falling is how you learn to fly," she said, and even though it sounded like something from a greeting card, it made me cry all over again. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I started therapy, which felt like peeling back layers of a wound that had been infected for years. My therapist, Dr. Monroe, was this no-nonsense woman in her 60s who didn't let me hide behind polite explanations. "Why do you think you need to make everyone else comfortable?" she asked during one session. Because that's what good people do, I said automatically. Says who? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. It was just something I'd always believed. That my worth was measured by how little trouble I caused. How helpful I was. How perfectly I could disappear into other people's needs. What if Dr. Monroe said slowly, your job isn't to make everyone comfortable? What if your job is just to be honest? That question changed everything. I started small. I told my coworker I couldn't cover her shift because I had plans, even though my plans were just staying home and reading. I told Daniel's mother I wouldn't be coming to Sunday dinner anymore. And I didn't apologize or explain. I quit my job at the marketing firm and took a position at a small nonprofit that actually aligned with my values, even though it paid less. Every boundary I set felt like a betrayal at first. People were confused, hurt, angry. They said I'd change and they didn't mean it as a compliment. But slowly, I started to notice something. The people who really loved me and not just the convenient version of me, they adjusted. They respected my boundaries. They even seemed to like me more when I was honest. Angela introduced me to her circle of friends, artists and writers and musicians, people who lived loud, messy, authentic lives. I started going to poetry readings and art shows. I bought a camera and started taking pictures, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. My photos weren't great at first, but they were mine. That mattered. I also started dating again, which was terrifying and occasionally humiliating. I went out with a guy who talked about his ex-wife for 2 hours straight. Another guy who ghosted me after 3 dates. A woman named Claire who was sweet but wanted something serious immediately, and I wasn't ready. But I also went out with Marcus, who worked at a bookstore and wrote science fiction novels in his spare time. He had kind eyes and he asked questions that made me think. On our 3rd date, I told him about my divorce, about losing myself, about still figuring out who I was. I waited for him to pull away, but instead he said, "Yeah, I get that. I think we're all just making it up as we go. We've been together for 8 months now, and it's different than anything I've known. It's not perfect. We argue sometimes, and there are days when I overthink everything and wonder if I'm doing it wrong. But it's real. I'm real with him. I say when something bothers me. I tell him what I need, and he does the same. It's messy and uncomfortable sometimes, but it's honest, and honest feels like home in a way perfect never did." Last month, I had lunch with Mama. She's slower now, her hands shaky from arthritis, but her eyes are still sharp. We sat at our old booth at the diner, and she ordered her usual coffee with too much cream and the chicken fried steak. "You look different," she said, studying my face. "Different how?" "I don't know, lighter maybe. Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." I smiled. "I'm not." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin and warm. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what?" "For making you think you had to be perfect. I just wanted you to have a better life than I did. But I think I made you believe your worth was in what you accomplished, not who you were." My throat tightened. I'd waited years to hear something like that, and now that it was here, I realized I didn't need it anymore. I'd already forgiven her. I'd forgiven everyone, including myself. "You did your best, Mama. We both did." She nodded, her eyes wet. "You're braver than I ever was, baby girl. I hope you know that. I saw Daniel once, a few months ago, at a coffee shop downtown. He was with someone, a petite brunette who laughed at something he said. He looked happy, or at least content. When he saw me, he hesitated, then walked over. 'Hey Jenna, hey Daniel.' We made awkward small talk for a minute, and then he said, 'You look good. Really good. Thanks. So do you.' There was a pause, and then he said, 'I'm sorry for what I said. That day in the kitchen wasn't fair.' I shook my head. 'You were right though. I wasn't who you thought I was. But that's because I wasn't being myself. I was being who I thought you needed.' He nodded slowly. I think I knew that, somewhere. I just didn't want to admit it. 'We both got it wrong,' I said gently. 'But we're getting it right now. That's what matters.' He smiled, a real smile this time, and went back to his table. I watched him for a second, feeling grateful and sad and free all at once. We'd both been trying to fit into a story that wasn't ours. Now we were finally writing our own. These days I live in a tiny house just outside the city, with a porch that overlooks a creek. I have 3 cats. which feels like the exact opposite of the golden retriever named Max. I work at the nonprofit, and I take pictures on weekends. And I'm learning to play the guitar even though I'm terrible at it. I still struggle sometimes. There are days when I catch myself slipping back into old patterns. Saying yes when I mean no, shrinking myself to make room for someone else. But now I notice it and I stop, and I course correct. Last week, Angela asked me to shoot photos for her new gallery show. We were sitting in her studio surrounded by her work, these huge bold prints of people caught in moments of pure honest emotion, and she said, "You know what I love about you, Jenna? What? You're not afraid to fall apart anymore. You're not trying to hold together with duct tape and a smile. You're just you. Messy, complicated, real you." I laughed. I'm still figuring out who that is. "Yeah," she said, grinning. "That's we all are. So if you're watching this, and you're feeling stuck in a life that looks good on paper, but feels empty inside, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're not ungrateful. You're not asking for too much. You're just human. And being human means you're allowed to change. You're allowed to want something different than what you thought you wanted. You're allowed to disappoint people in pursuit of your own peace. It's scary. God, it's terrifying. Leaving what's familiar, even when it's hurting you, feels like jumping off a cliff. But here's what I learned. You don't fall, you fly. And the people who love you, really love you, they'll be there when you land. They'll celebrate the real, messy, honest you. And the ones who can't, they were never meant to stay. I still think about that day in the kitchen sometimes. When Daniel told me I wasn't who he thought I was. And I realized I wasn't who I thought I was either. It felt like an ending, like the worst kind of failure. But it wasn't an ending, it was the beginning. The beginning of me choosing myself. The beginning of me learning that my worth isn't in how little space I take up, or how few problems I cause. The beginning of me understanding that the most important relationship I'll ever have is the one with myself. I'm 34 now. I'm single, childless, living in a house the size of Daniel's old garage, and I've never been happier. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing has to be. I'm enough, just as I am. Messy. Uncertain, still figuring it out, still learning, still growing. And if you're reading this, so are you. So here's my advice. From someone who spent half her life being someone else. Stop performing, stop shrinking, stop apologizing for taking up space. The world doesn't need another perfect person. It needs you. The real, flawed, complicated, beautiful you. And I promise that version of yourself is worth fighting for. This is my story. The story of how I lost myself and found myself and learned that those two things are sometimes the same journey. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. And if you're standing at your own crossroads right now, wondering if you have the courage to choose yourself, let me tell you something. I believe in you. Now go write your own story. The real one. The one that's been waiting inside you all along.